Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Los Angeles Angels. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins continued their winning ways against bad baseball teams, Dan, sweeping the Los Angeles Angels in L.A., making it 7 in a row for your Minnesota Twins, Dan.
Really remarkable. They haven't done this, I think it was in 13 years. They haven't won at least this many games in a row. Feels like they should have over the last couple years, but then I don't think they saw two teams quite as bad as these two back-to-back the way that they have. I think the Angels might actually be worse than the White Sox in some ways.
You know, there's an argument to be made, Dan. With the fielding that we saw out of that Angels outfield specifically, there were no Angels in the outfield, Dan. I mean, they were, but they couldn't be like where the balls were. I can't figure out how to make that a pun with the movie title. 3
of them would like zoom toward the ball, and then the ball would just fall in, and I couldn't tell, like, is this bad fielding or is this just luck? Because it felt like Ryan Jeffers, every hit Ryan Jeffers had, like 3 guys were almost there, but not quite.
Him and Kepler. It was like the exit velocity of all of their combined hits was like 18. Like that's what it was. 18 miles an hour. They were bloop singles that just landed where nobody was or where people were, but they couldn't figure out who the guy was supposed to be.
And there's so many interesting things that happened in the series in a very positive way for the Twins. They obviously get a lot of hits. They score a ton of runs after game 1 anyway. And then there was the booth with Hawkins and Plouffe. And this combination with Provis was very interesting. Like a weird, like a Homer mix. Like Trevor Plouffe is almost, he's almost like a Bert Blyleven. Like you could see Plouffe saying something very inappropriate. Couldn't you?
Oh, definitely. But the thing is, I think because of his podcast show with Chris Rosen and like the talking baseball stuff, I do think that he's so used to being on the mic that I think he's well versed enough that he's not going to slip up. But I think because he speaks so casually, you sort of in your head kind of forget that he's on TV and a broadcast booth.
That's a really good way to say it, because you're just waiting for it. Like, does he know he's on air? And he does. And so that's really good. So we'll have to talk about them kind of throughout here, because there were some moments that I think will come up later. But I think we have to start with the sausage.
My goodness, Dan. So this made the rounds. Here's the long and short of it is Kyle Farmer had some sort of deal with this sausage company, not Sheboygan, not Johnsonville, some random sausage company. So he'd been carrying a sausage around in his bag that they gave him as like a thank you for his spokesmanship, I guess. Well, Ryan Jeffers has begun throwing this sausage to players after they hit home runs or score runs. And so it's sort of become this bit. And why it's making the rounds is because Rocco gets asked about this, and he gives probably the most awkward response. Like, it's a pretty, like, you understand what's happening, but Rocco made it seem like, hey, by the way, this sausage is radioactive. If it opens, like, the whole clubhouse is going to get sick. And it's like, okay, first of all, summer sausage doesn't usually need to be refrigerated until after you open it. So that needs to be noted here. But also, Dan, I just wonder, was this Popkin's strategy all along? Like, he's just waiting for something to happen? Because if truly that's the case, why don't we just go to the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium, grab one of those sausages, run in a race, and make him the hitting coach?
It does harken back to the time that Byron Buxton almost got bratwursted, right? Like, these moments seem to be tied together in space-time.
I don't know, Dan. It's some weird stuff happening in the clubhouse, but I don't really care if it leads to Twins victories.
Yes, because it's 3 more. The Twins have climbed back above 500. They're 14-13. There are 4 teams in the AL Central above 500, which Lavelli Neal pointed this out in a tweet. It's the only division in baseball that's like that. The Guardians, 19-9. The Royals, 17-12. The Tigers, 16-12. Twins, 14-3. White Sox, we will come back to them, 6-22. Hey, take that, AL East. The AL Central's coming for you.
Maybe. Probably not, Dan. But it is great to see the team above 500. And honestly, yeah, we're 4.5 back from Cleveland. But this early in the season, all you care about is getting to 500 and above. And the Twins have done that. I don't think either of us would have seen this coming, Dan, even though we were facing the White Sox and the Angels.
Well, that's a good segue here into our series recap.
Series recap.
Game 1, David, I think the most exciting part for me, actually even before this, was the pregame hug between Byron Buxton and Miguel Sano. The reunion.
It was very heartfelt. You could tell that those guys were excited to see each other. Sano only plays in game 1, actually, but it was fun to see the interaction anytime there was a Twins player on third base, to see him sort of like, hey, what's going on? Hey, we spent some time together and whatnot. But, you're an English teacher, Dan, and I know that people misuse irony all the time, but a big issue that people had with Miguel Sano is that he struck out kind of a lot, right? So now his first at bat against his former team that he struck out with so many times, he shows plate discipline, Dan, and he watches a couple of pitches. And here we are. It's a full count, and the ball gets tossed in, and it's like 6 inches outside of the zone. And it would have been very poetic or sort of hilarious if Sano had swung through it. But he watched it, and he got rung up anyway, Dan. Apparently, the ump knew the history here, and he thought, what would be a funny narrative? If I rung him up here on a ball that's way outside the zone.
It was too bad. He struck out in both of his plate appearances, actually, and then he was replaced by Ari Adrianza, who I had forgotten was still in the major leagues. Like, the first time they showed him, I was like, is that his brother? Like, is there another Adrianza in the league? But no, it's him. He went 0-for-2 as well. And that was the last that we saw from Miguel Sano, which was curious to me. The Twins do win this game 5-3, though. They score the first 4 runs of the game. That was another trend in this series, the Twins scoring first and then early and then adding more on. But this is an exciting ball game, David.
Yeah, so Willi Castro playing shortstop. We commented on this quite a bit because obviously we're paying Farmer $6 million and he's supposed to be the backup shortstop. And now you're putting Willi Castro there. But my goodness, Dan, Willi Castro, he turned 27 and he said, you know what? This is the year of Willi, okay? I see Correa out there taking grounders, hitting off the tee, hitting live pitching. I don't care. I want to play shortstop every opportunity I get. And he is showing that he can be a guy, Dan.
We may have overstated the demise of a couple Twins veterans here, I think. Or we can't really call Willi Castro a veteran. But certainly Carlos Santana, he hit a home run, gets his 1,000th run, which it must be an exciting way to do that. We even saw Christian Vazquez throw out Mike Trout, trying to steal second base. Who is this? Who are these players?
It's a weird ragtag bunch of guys who we sort of lost faith in, Dan, and they were like, you know what? No, we may not be all-stars, but we can beat the White Sox and the Angels.
In any case, David, the Twins get a great start out of Bailey Ober, his second win of the season. He goes 7 1/3, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, 3 walks, but 8 strikeouts. Again, proving his capability. We're going to come back to how the end of this game was handled kind of from a pitching standpoint a little bit later. But the Twins do get this 5-3 win in what turned out to be the closest game of the series by far.
It's important to note also, Bailey Ober, I guess, was super sick before the game, but he still wanted to make the start, so Rocco sent him out there.
All right, let's go to game 2. The Twins win this one better than they'd won any game this season, I believe, 16-5. They score 1 in the first, 3 in the second, 3 in the third, 3 in the fourth, parrying any attempt that the Angels had to come back in this game, because I looked at this kind of early on and I thought, okay, well, it's 4-0, but then it's 4-2, and then it's 7-2, but then it's 7-4, and then the Angels just could not keep up with this Twins offense that had 16 runs on 17 hits.
It's amazing to be talking like this, isn't it? Teams can't keep up with the Twins offense. We haven't said that all season long, Dan. But some of the Twins' ineptitude still showed forth, Dan. In the top of the first, the Twins load the bases with no outs, and they only manage 1 run. Larnett, Kays, and Castro grounds into a double play, but the run that they scored was on a walk to Kepler that shouldn't have been a walk, Dan. It was a pitch in the zone. So Twins getting a little bit of help here with the bases loaded. They didn't deserve that run, but obviously in the long run didn't really matter.
Yeah, and the zone was really tight right away at the beginning of the game, and it did at that point then kind of look like it could be a bit of a slugfest. But yeah, the Twins get 3 more in the top of the second. It could have been bigger because Jeffers is making a good play. So he's trying to go from first to third on a play here, and Julian is trying to score. And I think what happened was that Jeffers saw the throw coming to third, and he thought, well, I can't be out before Julian scores. And so he stops. Clever girl. And he does this kind of stutter slide, and it was pretty clear on the replay that he was actually safe. The call on the field was out, and then that's ultimately what the umpires upheld. They didn't really, I don't think they confirmed it, but they didn't overturn it. I don't know, I guess I like the play in a way by Jeffers, but could he have not just gone in the first place and just saved us all the trouble?
It kind of seemed like he would have made it had he just gone straight in, but yeah, I think it was weird depending on the timing of Julian going home. But what was so funny about this, Dan, is I had the note sheet open, as I often do when I'm watching the game, and I'm typing in the notes, and I literally wrote, call it third, called out, call reversed, Jeffers on third.
Yeah.
But then I had to delete that note out, Dan, because they didn't overturn it. I was shocked.
Again, doesn't matter. The Twins add 3 more in the top of the third with a Kepler single, a Castro single. Santana, who again had a huge series, hits a double. Farmer hits a double. All of this happens with no outs. The Twins score 3, and then from there, the route is on. We'll talk about the top of the fourth when Santana comes back up again. A couple other highlights. Kepler hits his first home run of the season to deep right center. And then, again, more runs in the 7th and more runs in the 9th. And the funny thing about this in the top of the 9th, so Ryan Jeffers gets kind of a Wallner-style home run here because Aaron Hicks comes in. They made a really big deal out of this in the broadcast, maybe because it was, 14-5 at this point, coming in up to this at bat, and you got to talk about something.
I almost tweeted something along the lines of, too bad Matt Wallner's not here so he could jack a homer prior to Jeffers' homer, but I felt like I had sort of singled him out too much to do that.
Well, it's amazing how when you give up 5 runs as a pitching staff, it doesn't really look so bad when your team scores 16. We'll come back to Chris Paddock a little bit later. Cody Funderburk and Jay Jackson mop up with a couple innings each. They combine to allow 4 base runners, 1 earned run, and 3 strikeouts. The Twins get 7 hits with runners in scoring position. Every starter gets a hit. They have 17 hits on the game, just 5 strikeouts. But I think maybe my favorite moment of the game was actually when I was kind of following on. I was at prom, David. I went to prom as the chaperone in charge here.
Let's clarify what your role at prom was. Sorry, here. It's a little bit dangerous. When you're our age, Dan, and you're saying you went to prom, people have a lot of ideas in their head about what you could possibly mean.
Well, I must say, so I was chaperoning prom, and I turned around and I could have sworn that maybe there was a Twins player because this is the song that came on. And I looked for the German feet. I thought maybe Max's parents were here, but they weren't. It was just teenagers dancing. The song still plays. I had a good little chuckle in my head. It was great.
Good. Well, let's go on to game 3, Dan. So Pablo Lopez, we were all nervous about him. His last start, he didn't look good. But then, Dan, he takes a perfect game into the 5th inning. Both sides, actually, Dan, had really good
I'm sorry, hold on. Can we
innings.
say that as that thing? That's not enough. You need to go like 5 or you can take a perfect game into the 6th or the 7th or the 8th or the 9th, but you can't. I don't think it matters. You can't take one into the 5th, right? You're 12 batters in.
Okay, first of all, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic
for
the sake of like what happened in the 5th inning. If you would have let me finish my thought instead of rudely interrupting and stating the time limits that are
we
totally
start talking
arbitrary.
About perfect games, and I get my guard kind of goes up just a little bit, David. It's kind of my top.
You know what happened, though. You know that's as far as the illustration can possibly go is me saying he took it into the 5th. I couldn't say anything else about perfect games, Dan, because Pablo imploded. That's what happened. You know what happens? Why do you do this, Dan?
Sorry. Anyway, you got me going. Go ahead, continue.
Well, I lost my train of thought now, Dan. I'm everywhere. My goodness.
All right, I'll pick it up.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence, and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
Sorry, David. Twins win this game 11-5. Again, 17 hits. Now, they benefited from 3 Angels errors. And this was another one where the Twins take a lead, the Angels come back, and then they fizzle.
I don't know what to tell you, Dan, about this Angels team because it's shocking how many misplays they had in the field. Infield, outfield didn't matter, Dan. The Twins got some major benefits on balls hit, again, directly at fielders into the arms of any outfielder. Just seemed like they couldn't make a play on the ball.
Twins get 4 runs in the top of the 5th. Which kind of takes control at the time. Vasquez with a single. Farmer, again, another hit. Martin with a 2 RBI single with the infield in. The Angels seem to almost reflexively, it's like if you gave them enough innings and enough base runners, they would just be like huddled around the home plate like a campfire. Like that's kind of what I was waiting for. Like infield in is serious for the Angels.
Ogres are like onions.
That actually wasn't a terrible metaphor. I don't even know that you
Thank
deserve the sounder. I enjoyed that a lot. But it was funny because we mentioned the broadcast booth, but Plouffe apparently hates infield in.
In
this instance, bases loaded with no outs. This is when Kirilloff is at bat, actually, in game 3. And Plouffe is just absolutely destroying Ron Washington, saying, all you're doing is open up holes. You're just a guy with no outs and the infield in with the bases loaded. He's loving it. What are you possibly thinking? I don't know what the run ratio is. Like, Plouffe is legitimately upset about this, that the Angels have deployed this infield in strategy.
It's a crime against baseball, the way that the Angels were playing, I think. We will talk a little bit more about the top of the 7th when the Twins kind of retake control with 4 more runs. And Mike Trout finally waits until his last plate appearance of the series, actually, to get a hit, which was kind of surprising. He came up in a lot of big spots, including at the end of game 1. But ultimately, the Twins were really able to keep him in check, keep him in a net, one might say.
Okay, one moment.
Ogres are like onions. End of story.
Yeah, that wasn't
terrible, Dan. Oh my goodness. Fish puns are the worst because everybody can make them and everybody's got last names that have fish names in them, Dan. I'm not interested.
Man, you're cutthroat tonight, David.
It's been a long day, Dan, okay? It's been a long day. I spent a lot of time with
You totally missed.
children.
That was another fish joke. Cutthroat trout.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
See, I did it.
You're
I'll
making
sneak
me
another one
flounder
in.
here,
Just you
Dan.
wait. I'm going to make some notes here.
You didn't even hear my joke.
I'm perched on the end of my seat here, David.
Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. This is enough. Let's run to the segments, Dan.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
You know, that was a salmon run joke. You got that, Dan?
Yes, of course. It's very good. So
I hate this show sometimes, Dan. I absolutely hate this show.
Ogres are like onions. End of story.
We don't even have a pun button. What's a pun button here that we can use here?
We'll find one. Anyway, this is not a great segment for either of us. I'm last here. I picked Byron Buxton. He only had 2 points. You picked Larnach, who had 3. The listeners took Kepler with 8, but Hogs gets another win here because of Ryan Jeffers' 14 points. Now, he was not the team high because, of course, it was Carlos Santana with 18.
Okay, so I do need to note, as I was getting the listener Puckett's picks, it was a husband and wife who were making the pick this time around. And the wife said Santana. I think she was joking, but maybe she wasn't, because the husband's like, well, no, I think I'm going to go with Kepler. And so they're kind of going back and forth. But it's just so funny. So I get a text from the listener, and I forget how they contacted me, and she just said, I wanted to take Santana, and you laughed at me. That's what was just absolutely ruthless from the listeners, Dan.
Well, Hogs extends his lead. He's got 4.5 points. David, you and the listeners are tied with 2, and I'm still sitting there with 1.5 because I keep picking Byron Buxton. I'm like, it's like you picked Correa like instinctively, obsessively last year, and I feel like that's what I'm doing with Buxton.
It does seem that he's healthy and that he does have these flashes of what he's going to do. But then, you look at the final score of a series and it's like, what's going on here? And part of it has to do with playing time, Dan.
I know. Rocco doesn't want to play him because he doesn't have to. Figure don't use Buxton if you don't have to.
We're going to have a lot of roster questions here in a moment, Dan, because there's some moves that are going to be made very shortly.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
Well, you go for it, Dan. You tell him who gets your Beast moniker.
Yeah, I'll go with Carlos Santana. He had couple home runs in this series. I mean, gosh, the guy broke out just when he had to. From where his average was, now it looks respectable. He's at 182, and it's still not great, but his OPS of 583 just shows you how far down he was. And suddenly then, I see this great first base play, and I think, maybe there's room for this guy if he can still hit a few home runs every now and then.
That is sort of funny, right? That like he's been a really solid first baseman for the whole season, but we would never mention it because he's like 0 for 1,000. We're like, okay, well, we can't talk about how good he is on the field because he's been terrible at the plate. Now he hits one home run, and Dan's like, he could win a Gold Glove.
You picked another guy. Lots of options here.
This was very difficult, actually, and I love series like this, obviously, as Twins fans, when it's difficult to pick the beast. I'm going to go with Willi Castro. Again, I just think that he has stepped up big. Bally Sports kept putting up that same stat line of like him before Correa and after Correa's injury. And it's like he became a different person. They did some sort of like, in Space Jam where they put the ball and all of the basketball players touch it and their skill goes into the basketball.
Yes.
Like Willi Castro is an alien who grabbed onto a baseball that had the skill of Carlos Correa. And that just went into him because my goodness, he goes 8 for 15. 2 RBI. He had one bad grounding into double play, but Willie seems like a new guy.
He is, and he's going to obviously have a roster spot here as the cuts come down. Looking at the bench, I went with Manny Margot because I think he was the only guy who wasn't really even great, and he even had an RBI in the series. I mean, he wasn't terrible. He just didn't have a standout series, and I got to think he's the guy who's got to be cut, but I don't think he's going to be cut.
We'll talk about that in a little bit here, but he actually is the only guy who registered plate appearances who didn't get a hit in the whole series. So he got an RBI on a sac fly, but he never got a hit, which kind of the norm, honestly, for this season, Dan.
Do you have anybody on your bench?
I don't. I kept looking through the list, and I think that Pablo Lopez is probably the leader in the clubhouse because the Twins did so well, and there's no one who I can point to be like, oh man, I guess if I had to put someone on the bench, it'd be the Angels defense, but that doesn't even make sense, Dan, because I was happy they played so terribly. I'm not going to put anybody on the bench. You won 7 in a row. I don't want to pick on anybody, Dan.
All right, well, let's go on here and pick on Rocco a little bit in the rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
Well, there's always room to pick on Rocco, Dan.
Absolutely. Yes.
Like, I may not want to pick on a player, but Rocco, no problem. And actually, I'm not even going to pick on Rocco, Dan. Game 1, when you're getting to the end of that game and it's close, it's 5-3, and you're not sure what he's going to do, you look at the bullpen and you're thinking, Bowman and Thielbar, these are the choices that you make. But then you realize that Jackson Stewart pitched the last 2 games. Like, what are you going to do? You're not going to put him out for a 3rd straight day. He did the best as what he could, got away with the victory. And then game 2, Dan, he left Paddock in for as long as he possibly could because he's like, okay, we're going to win this. He's struggling. I don't want to use our bullpen guys. Stay out there, law enforcement man.
he was actually kind of in a tight spot with the bullpen. Now that you pointed out, I mean, like, he did not have the arms. It was very lucky that the Twins scored all of these runs, because if they had been in a 6-5 kind of game, that could have turned ugly pretty fast. So good on the offense. I'm going to look at game 2 because Rocco had a chance to do what he normally likes to do.
Hang on a minute. We could use a pinch.
And it was only the second inning. Like, I was seriously thinking, okay, Rocco's going to pull all these lefties, because the Angels, I thought it was kind of odd that they pulled Jose Soriano so early. I get that the Twins were kind of hitting him around, but for the reasons that we just talked about, like, it's only the second inning. You got to get through a couple more games here. But Rocco resisted the urge. He left the lefties in. Very proud of him there, because he had all of his righties on the bench. And this screamed Manuel Margot. We didn't get him in that starting lineup, but we really want to get a good 8 innings out of him. And so Rocco didn't. He resisted the urge, and the Twins scored 16 runs. So I'm hoping that this kind of chastens that instinct that, maybe Jace Tingler is standing there saying, Rocco, just take a minute. Think this through.
I don't
That's
know.
what I think.
I'm not real convinced that, like, this coaching staff, there's a lot happening. I don't know.
Well, they don't understand summer sausages, I don't think, and how that works. So I think
they don't
right
think
there.
about much. Remember, like, that's all we get in the interviews are, well, I didn't really think about that. What are you doing? You have like one job. You have one job, figuring out which players to play when. What were you thinking about, if not that?
Anyway, I don't have anything more for him. Let's go on here to the Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
I suppose chronologically here, Dan, why don't you start us off?
So real quick, I just wanted to highlight the fact that Caleb Thielbar came in and got Mike Trout out to ground out to third in game 1 of the bottom 9th. That had game-winning walk-off home run written all over it, if anything did.
I am not saying this is the same thing. So don't say that I'm saying that this is the same thing. But all that was in my mind was Ohtani pitching to Trout in the World Baseball Classic. Like that last at bat for Japan to win it. That's what was in my mind. I'm like, this seems like a chance. It's not Ohtani on the mound right now. It's Thielbar. I think we can see the opposite of what took place in the World Baseball Classic.
And then just real quick, in game 2, top 4, I loved Carlos Santana's 3-run home run here. The Angels, like I've said, had kind of come back a little bit. He works a full count and then hits just kind of a bomb to the right field corner, and the catcher, if you watch his reaction for the Angels catcher, the moment that bat is swung, I mean, he just puts his head down and he knows, dang it, that is not what was supposed to happen from the Angels' perspective.
It's not good if the catcher doesn't even need to watch it.
No.
Like if he doesn't even care where the ball went, he's that sad, Dan.
What do you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with game 3, top 7. After allowing the Angels back in, the Twins put up 4 runs with really good plate discipline. So they go walk, single, walk, double by Kirilloff, and then another single. But the big play that I want to highlight here, Buxton is on third with 1 out, and Santana grounds out to second base, but Buxton is so fast from third base, he manages to score, and there's not a throw home even. They have to go to first to get the out for Santana.
The speed plays, right?
Yeah.
And it was... that was a well-managed play by, like, I thought that was the right moment to bring Kirilloff in. I texted out, I thought he was going to hit a home run. He hit a 2-run double. That's pretty good.
I believe you sent a follow-up to that text also, Dan, that you said because all of those runs scored, it basically counted as Kirilloff hitting a home run. That's not how that works even a little bit, Dan.
Yeah, they all scored. It's kind of the same thing.
You serious?
Okay. With that, Dan, let's go on to Mauer's musings.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's musings.
Will the Twins cut bait with Margot if he can't turn it around? I mean, the Twins were patient with Santana, and clearly that's worked out. Because, Dan, we would have never said anything negative about Santana, about not wanting him on this team. I mean, I don't think if you listen back to all our episodes, we were always very just, hey, let's be patient. Let's take our time. I'm sure he's going to turn it around. So maybe that's the approach they take with Margot. But the Twins are currently paying him $8 million or something like that. It's a little bit weird. There was a whole bunch of money exchanged, and like the Rays are paying part of his contract, and the Dodgers, I think, are paying some part of it. It's very confusing who's paying his contract, Dan. But I will say he's getting paid to not do much at the moment.
I think we're just a little bit jaded by Joey Gallo.
Well, don't worry. Be happy.
We would have wished that the Twins would have cut Joey Gallo, right away last season, but they held on to him, and then he literally sat on the bench for the last month, right? I think they made up an injury or something, but he was a non-factor, and so I think we don't want to see the Twins do that with Manny Margot. We want him to cut bait now, and yet that's just, again, that's not the Twins' way.
Not the Twins' way, Dan. Loyalty and a lack of payroll, that's the Twins' way.
But I think what happens is I think Jose Miranda gets sent down. I think he's the logical guy to fall here.
I am
not throwing away my shot.
I don't think it's the right choice, but I do think that that's what's going to happen, which is too bad because he's been pretty good since he came up, which is a roundabout way of getting to my question, I guess, David. So I've kind of already answered it, but I have the Correa question is who gets sent down when Carlos Correa comes back, which could be, as soon as as this next series against the White Sox.
I mean, if it's not Margot, which I don't think is really an option anyway, yeah, it's either Martin or Miranda, I think are the logical choices. Larnach, I guess, would be an option. And the only reason why I'm even seeing Larnach is because Rocco refuses to play the man. I don't understand it. I pick him in Puckett's picks and Rocco's like, well, let's make sure he doesn't get many plate appearances, okay? I don't really want to see that guy on the field. He looked at me wrong in the clubhouse one time. I don't really understand what's happening, but it does seem that Martin or Miranda are the logical choices, but you don't really want anybody to move right now because they're playing so well. And the guys who you do want moved, Farmer or Margot, you can't really move.
Absolutely. And I guess there's another interesting case to be made for, who gets sent down when Duran comes back too, given just the way that the bullpen, guys like Cole Sands have played pretty well. Kyle Funderburg's played pretty well. So it's some of those guys we think would be kind of lower down on the list have, I think, played their way onto a roster spot that they should keep into May.
It's a weird thought that we're even talking about, well, who is Duran going to take the place of? And not in a way that we shouldn't bring Duran up. That would be, ridiculous on its face. But what you're asking, Dan, is a question that I don't think any of us would have saw coming, knowing the injuries we had to the bullpen entering the season.
Testifies just how weird of a month of baseball this has been for this team.
Series grades.
It's got to be an A, Dan. I do feel, though, that the teams that the Twins have beaten, it sometimes feels like they're trying to help the Twins win, like with their fielding. It's like there's some sort of, not an honor system, but there's some desire on these teams to see the Twins be competitive in the AL Central. But they're still beating teams, Dan. 7 in a row, you can't give them anything but an A in this circumstance.
The math checks out, David. So the advanced retreat, if you win 7 in a row and 3 more here, it's got to be a continued advance just because of all the great offense we saw, which segues into the well-played baseball. The only demerit here really was that the starting pitching was not fantastic, other than Bailey Ober, who looked great. Paddock and Pablo just didn't really have it, but it doesn't really matter. But again, 17 hits with runners in scoring position, the timely hitting that this team had, the defense was good. So I gave him a 9 out of 10 there. So 19 out of 20, that's an A.
Yeah, I think it has to be, Dan. And if you look at the strikeout totals, again, 6 in game 1, only 5 in game 2, and then only 7 in game 3. I say only because those numbers, we would have killed for those numbers of strikeouts last season, Dan.
Well, yeah. And as far as team stat rankings now, the Twins are 12th in OPS at 720. They are still 29th in stolen bases.
Vasquez got on the board, Dan.
He did.
He ties Buxton with 1 stolen base on the season.
And then they're also 11th in home runs now with 30. So the offense is back, I suppose. And we'll see. We'll see as they, this is one of those things where it's like, as the season goes out and the competition, everybody kind of plays the same teams. We'll see how these really shake out. But obviously, this is trending in the right direction when it ought to be.
Hopefully it continues this direction, Dan. The continued advancement. That's what I want to see. But with that, Dan, let's go on to Herbie's headline.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
Pete Alonso, Dan. I have a love for Pete Alonso.
He's your guy.
He's my guy. Only again, a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why Pete Alonso is my guy, but particularly, Dan, it's because he gave all of his money away from his winning his home run derby to charities, even when he was making the league minimum, which I really appreciated. But anyway, he hits his 200th home run, which is, I think it's 4th fastest in the NL or something like that. But I hope that he continues to mash homers, Dan. And man, he would be a fun pickup to see the Twins make, but that's just not going to happen.
It would be pretty cool. Give him a few more years. He can do the old Jim Thome round, I suppose.
Yeah, we might see him in the old, Jim Thome, Nelson Cruz, Carlos Santana, sort of parade of old guys who hit a lot of homers.
I'm not dead.
That's when the Twins like them, right at the edge, right at the end of their career.
It's like when you have leftovers in the fridge and you're thinking, maybe these are still good.
Okay, well, a couple other quick things. By the way, the Chicago White Sox, who the Twins are going to play again here, just swept the Rays. So now they have 6 wins on the season. So good on them for that. The joke's on...
This game makes no sense sometimes, Dan. I don't understand baseball. The White Sox were so bad. In every single one of those games, they were so bad. And then they went and swept the Rays? What is happening?
We'll see what happens this weekend in Chicago. But also, Hoax sent us this tweet just before we recorded a literal wild goose chase in the Angels-Tigers game. And the goose, oh my gosh. I was hooked to the very end, whatever, is this goose going to get out? Is he going to get out? And then he sails right into the scoreboard. Thunk.
Oof, it was, he definitely thought it was blue skies, Dan, but it was not blue skies. It was a scoreboard, and it was awkward, and it landed like right next to a lady. I guess, Dan, if a full-size Canadian goose drops next to me in my seat,
Oh, Canada.
I don't think I would have stayed in my seat, Dan. I think I would have moved away from this bird. And I'm so happy though that this didn't happen in a Twins game, because Eddie Julian would have ran to that goose's fellow countrymen in order to perform CPR on that bird, whatever he would need to do to keep that Canadian bloodline alive.
Do you know, though, like, the decimation that geese can do to a football field or a baseball field or whatever? I mean, you give 50 geese like a day on a baseball field, and that is a groundskeeper's nightmare. There'll be poop all over the place.
I'm sorry, are you insisting that in some scenario the Tigers were going to allow this goose to just take up residence on the field? Were those the two options here?
No, I'm just saying.
I don't even, what's the segue here, Dan? You're just like, well, typically you wouldn't want a whole flock of geese on a baseball field. That wouldn't be good from a groundskeeping perspective. Shocking. That's brilliant. We should start a whole new podcast about places you wouldn't want a flock of geese to be for any length of time for the sake of the groundskeepers.
I'm just saying I didn't feel that bad for the goose when it got cooked at the end of that video. That's all.
Those two thoughts those are different things, Dan. This isn't a flock of geese. It's one goose. Dan, okay, now we're going to get letters from PETA because Dan wants all Canadian geese who fly out of their V formation to be shot on sight. Oh, man.
I just don't want them pooping on the field. That's all. That's all I wanted to say. In any case, we need to move on here to our final segment, Puckett's Picks, for the upcoming White Sox series.
And we'll see you tomorrow night. Puckett's Picks.
The listeners, Dan, are going to take Santana. And truth be told, Dan sent the listener pick, which was Santana. And then it went to Dan, and then it went to me. And I said, I'll take Santana. Because I thought there's no way that the listeners would take Santana, but they did. So the listeners take Santana. Dan took Jeffers. I took Kirilloff. And then Hogs is going to take Buxton, which we have to stop Hogs, Dan. We got to stop this madman.
Well, Hogs will get to defend that pick on the next two series, actually. He's going to fill in for you, David. I know you got some things to take care of. I hope that you enjoy the break, but I hope that the Twins keep winning even in your absence.
I hope so too, Dan. I don't know if it's going to be super enjoyable. It's going to be work and homework for the most part, finishing out the semester, but I will try my best to keep tabs on this Minnesota team that I love so much.
Well, since we're not going to hear from you for a week, how about you go ahead and send us out?
Will do. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win and find our Min for the Win Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you can leave us a rating or a like, we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kuvas and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.